Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to completely subvert one of our most deeply ingrained societal assumptions. Seriously, we're unpacking the science, the psychology, and the evolutionary biology behind a fascinating and, frankly, kind of disturbing paradox that we found in some really groundbreaking source material.
Okay, let's dive into this. Can you ever be too good of a person? I mean, we naturally assume that empathy and altruism are universally good traits, right? The more, the better. But the source texts we're explaining today, like the really comprehensive book Pathological Altruism, along with insights from evolutionary psychologist Dr. Gad Saad, argue that when these noble virtues are pushed to an uncalibrated extreme, they can actually become deeply, deeply destructive.
And this brilliantly illustrates the book's really striking onion metaphor. The designer's intent here is pretty profound. Basically, something rooted in what we think of as absolute purity. That white, clear center can reverberate outwards and, well, develop into something dark, crinkly, and brown on the outside. It's a perfect visual for how well-meaning intentions can actually harbor a dark core of unintended consequences.
Now, to ground our explainer today, we really need a shared vocabulary. The text defines pathological altruism as any behavior where the stated aim or even just the implied motivation is to promote another person's welfare, but which irrationally causes substantial negative consequences to the other person or even to yourself. In short, it's when your sincere intention is to help, but the actual outcome is pure harm.
So, to understand exactly how a virtue becomes a pathology, Dr. Gad Saad offers a brilliant analogy comparing it to OCD, or obsessive-compulsive disorder. Think about it, washing your hands to avoid catching a cold from someone. That is a perfectly adaptive, incredibly healthy evolutionary trait. But what happens if that behavior loses its stopping mechanism? You wash your hands in scalding hot water for 8 hours a day, right up until the skin literally peels off. That once adaptive trait, it has become totally maladaptive.
Well, the exact same biological and psychological logic applies to empathy. Adaptive empathy is absolutely essential. It allows us to possess a theory of mind, to connect with others, and to build functioning societies. But Dr. Saad introduces this wild concept called suicidal empathy. Basically, this is empathy without a stopping mechanism. It's when you overextend your compassion to the absolute point of self-destruction or even societal harm. It's literally our most noble virtue going rogue.
Section 1. The micro level. Empathy turned inward. Let's take a look.
The book actually outlines several startling personal manifestations of this pathology. We're talking about things ranging from animal hoarding and codependency to eating disorders and even empathy-based survivor guilt. In all of these cases, the individual sincerely believes they're acting out of love, care, or selflessness, right? But the outcome ends up being highly destructive to themselves or to the people around them.
Let's take animal hoarding as an example. It's almost always framed by the hoarder as a highly benevolent mission to save the animals. However, the source material points out that this overwhelming feeling of being a savior actually masks deep cruelty. See, the hoarding serves the individual's own emotional needs for control, identity, or intimacy, all while the animals are left living in horrific, unmet conditions. The altruistic mission is ultimately actualized as sheer egoism.
Then we have pathogenic guilt. Now, this is a seriously warped form of normal empathy where an individual falsely believes that their own success, their happiness, or their well-being is somehow the direct cause of another person's suffering. The text shows how this can tie into a massive self-serving bias where individuals start blaming all negative outcomes on external systems. They end up stripping people of their personal agency simply because the altruist feels so overwhelmingly guilty about the inherent inequalities of life.
Section 2. The macro level. When societies care too much.
Now, looking at things on a broader scale, this table observes how hyperempathy manifests blindly across the political spectrum, and it carries immense societal costs. As the sources point out, on the left, we might see suicidal empathy in criminal justice, where a desire to be endlessly lenient to violent repeat offenders ends up endangering innocent civilians. Or in the UK, where authorities allegedly ignored the systemic abuse of young girls by grooming gangs just to avoid appearing racist. But it happens on the right too. Consider economic protectionism. Here, empathy for domestic workers in obsolete industries leads to massive tariffs, which ultimately harm the broader global economy and actually raise prices for everyone. The pathology doesn't care about your politics at all. It just completely warps your decision-making.
We also see this tragic irony in international relations, specifically when it comes to foreign aid. Emotion-driven, non-strategic financial assistance to impoverished nations can actually be, well, too much of a good thing.
According to the text, over the past several decades, a massive number of these altruistic programs have just completely failed. By relying on default emotional approaches rather than smart, calculated strategy, they've actually crippled local economies and worsened the very poverty they were desperately meant to alleviate.
And at the absolute darkest extreme, the sources examine pathological obedience. When in-group altruism and self-deception just run wild, it leads to a blind, pathological commitment to a group's ideology. This twisted sense of fighting for a greater good is exactly what drives suicide martyrs and even mass genocides. It's wild to think about, but the perpetrators in these horrific historical events genuinely believe they were acting altruistically for the benefit of their own people.
Section 3. The evolutionary mismatch. Why do we do this? So if this behavior is so incredibly destructive both to individuals and to entire civilizations, why on earth do humans engage in it? Well, the famous evolutionary biologist Edward O. Wilson was once asked about his thoughts on communism, a system built on ultimate egalitarian altruism. His punchy reply was simply, "Great idea, wrong species." This perfectly sets up the core concept that our societal structures must actually match our evolutionary history. We aren't communistic social ants, we're humans.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the biological yin and yang of altruistic actions. You see, our cognitive, emotional, and moral systems evolved specifically to solve problems in small, tight-knit tribes. In those ancient settings, jumping in front of a threat to save your kin made perfect evolutionary sense. But when we take that exact same small tribe empathy and apply it to complex, modern, globalized societies, we experience a severe evolutionary mismatch.
Because in these incredibly complex modern societies, pathological altruists act as what the sources call obstinate cooperators. They just cooperate indiscriminately. Now, sure, this can sometimes catalyze social cohesion and create this messianic effect that spreads through a community. But it also makes them highly, highly vulnerable, because they absolutely refuse to stop cooperating. Even when defection is clearly the rational choice, they become super easily exploited by selfish actors, con artists, and incredibly dangerous ideologies.
Section 4. The sweet spot. Calibrating our empathy. So how do we actually fix this? How do we stop our absolute best intentions from paving the road to hell? Well, the sources strongly argue that empathy should never be viewed as a straight line where more is always better. Instead, think of empathy as an inverted U-curve. Down on one end, if you have too little empathy, you exhibit straight-up psychopathic, callous tendencies. But if you have way too much empathy, you slide right down the other side into suicidal empathy, leading directly to the personal and civilizational harm we've been talking about. So the crucial point is finding the sweet spot, what Dr. Saad refers to as the Aristotelian mean. True virtue isn't about blind, limitless compassion. Not at all. It requires strategic, measured, and highly intelligent application. It's all about expressing the exact right amount of empathy at the right time, to the right degree, and directed toward the right person.
We've definitely covered some challenging, deeply counterintuitive ground today in this explainer, but I want to leave you with one final provocative thought based on the source material. When you feel that urge to help, when you feel that sudden rush of moral righteousness, who is your empathy really serving? Is it actually helping them, or is it just a way to make yourself feel good? Think about it. Thanks so much for tuning in, and keep questioning the consensus.